Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the heart of the Aztec Empire, where the streets gleam with obsidian blades, the air hums with the rhythm of 1,000 drums, and every sunrise might be your last if you don't know the rules. You're about to discover why surviving even a single day in Tenochtitlan, the jewel of Mesoamerica, would push you beyond every limit you thought you had. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like why an empire so advanced, so powerful, could vanish almost overnight when strangers arrived from across the sea. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, or what draws you to the mysteries of ancient civilizations. Your words mean the world, and they help this channel grow into something we can all treasure together. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. The year is 1519 and you're standing at the southern edge of Lake Texcoco, watching the morning mist lift off waters so still they mirror the volcanic peaks in the distance. Before you stretches a causeway, a raised stone road that slices across the lake like a pale scar, and at its far end, shimmering in the early light, rises Tenochtitlan. The city seems to float, its white temples and painted buildings stacked in geometric perfection, connected by a web of canals that catch the sun in silver flashes. You've heard the rumours, of course. Everyone has. They say 250,000 people live on this island, that its markets overflow with treasures from 1,000 miles away, that its priests speak directly to gods who demand tribute in the most precious currency imaginable, human life. You step off the canoe, your legs unsteady after hours on the water, and immediately the causeway swallows you in a river of humanity. Merchants balance towering loads of cotton and cacao on their backs, held by tumplines that dig grooves into their foreheads. Warriors stride past in quilted armour, their arms decorated with scars that tell stories you can't read, their eyes scanning the crowd with predatory patience. Porters jog by carrying nobles in litters so ornate they seem to defy physics, the curtains embroidered with hummingbirds and serpents that writhe in the morning breeze. And the noise gods. The noise. Vendors shout in Nahuatl, a language that sounds like water rushing over stones. All TL and LLI endings that your tongue could never hope to shape. Flutes trill somewhere to your left. A conch shell trumpet blares from a temple you can't yet see. Children laugh, dogs bark, and underneath it all, like a heartbeat, drums pulse from the city centre. You realise within minutes that you don't belong. Your clothes are wrong, too simple, too drab, lacking the vibrant dyes that mark status in this world. Your hair is wrong, falling loose instead of bound up in the styles that signal your place in the cosmic order. Your skin is wrong, unmarked by the tattoos and scars that identify clan and profession. You might as well be invisible, except you're not invisible at all. People stare. A woman carrying a basket of tomatoes pauses to whisper to her companion, both sets of eyes tracking you like you're a curiosity in someone's private collection. A warrior slows his pace, hand drifting toward the obsidian-studded club at his belt, and you force yourself to keep walking, to pretend you know where you're going. The causeway itself is an engineering marvel that shouldn't exist. Not in 1519, not without the technology you take for granted. It's wide enough for 8 people to walk abreast, built from stone and packed earth that somehow withstands the lake's constant assault. Every few hundred yards, wooden bridges span gaps in the structure, removal sections that can be lifted at night or during attacks, turning the causeway into a series of isolated segments. You spot canoes passing beneath these bridges, their paddlers navigating with practiced ease through the opening. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs learned their hydraulic engineering from earlier civilizations like the Teotihuacanos, or whether they innovated these techniques independently, but standing here, watching the system function with clockwork precision, you understand it doesn't matter. What matters is that it works, and you're walking on proof that the old world doesn't have a monopoly on genius. The smell hits you next, a complex layering that shifts with every breeze. There's the clean scent of the lake, tinged with algae and fish, the sharp bite of chili peppers roasting somewhere nearby, the sweeter notes of flowers, marigolds and dahlias that spill from gardens along the causeway, and underneath, barely perceptible, something else, something metallic and organic that you can't quite place, that makes the back of your neck prickle with instinctive unease. You're halfway across now, and the city reveals itself in greater detail. The temples aren't just tall, they're mountains of stone that dominate the skyline. They're step pyramids painted in colours so bright they hurt to look at directly. Red and blue and white, accented with black glyphs you can't decipher. At the summit of the tallest pyramid, you spot twin shrines, their thatched roofs smoking with offerings that never cease. The Templo Maya, you think, recalling fragments of stories. The heart of the empire, the place where the gods feed. As you near the city's edge, guards appear. They're stationed at a checkpoint where the causeway meets the island, and they're not the ceremonial sort you might expect. These are professionals, their eyes cold, their postures relaxed in the way that only comes from absolute confidence. One steps forward, blocking your path with his body, and speaks in rapid Nahuatl. You have no idea what he's saying. You try Spanish, then gestures, and the guard's expression shifts from suspicion to something close to amusement. He calls to his companion, and they exchange words that make them both grin. One reaches out to touch your clothing, pinching the fabric between his fingers like he's evaluating livestock. Do you remember that feeling in school when the teacher called on you and you hadn't read the assignment? Multiply that by 1,000. You're standing at the gates of the most powerful empire in Mesoamerica, unable to speak, unable to explain, unable to do anything but hope they decide you're interesting rather than threatening. After what feels like an eternity but is probably 30 seconds, the guard waves you through, you're in, you've arrived, and you have absolutely no idea what you're supposed to do next. The streets of Tenochtitlan spread before you in a grid so orderly it would make a Roman engineer weep with envy. Canals run parallel to walkways, creating a transportation network that moves goods and people with fluid efficiency. Bridges arch over the water every 100 feet, and you watch porters navigate them without breaking stride, their balance honed by lifetimes of practice. Buildings rise on either side, some made from volcanic stone, others from adobe, their walls painted with murals that depict gods and warriors and scenes from a mythology you've never studied. Flat roofs serve as gardens where vegetables grow in raised beds, and you spot people tending crops 5 stories above the street, their silhouettes framed against the morning sky. The scale overwhelms you. You've heard that Tenochtitlan rivals any European city larger than Paris. Cleaner than London, but hearing and seeing are different animals. This isn't a collection of hovels clustered around a fortress. This is urban planning on a level that won't appear in your world for centuries. And as you stand there, trying to process it all, trying to figure out where a stranger goes to find food or shelter, or simply survive the next few hours, you realize the truth that every time traveller learns, eventually knowledge isn't the same as experience. And all your modern advantages mean precisely nothing when you can't even ask for directions. You take your first steps into the city proper, and within moments you understand that the Aztec Empire runs on a visual language you can't speak. Every person who passes you is a walking declaration of identity, status, and profession, and you dressed in your plain, Anonymous clothing might as well be wearing a sign that says outsider in letters 10 feet tall. A nobleman glides past, his Tilmatli cloak knotted at one shoulder, the fabric woven with geometric patterns so intricate they seem to shift as he moves. Quetzal feathers impossibly green, shimmering with iridescence cascade from his headdress. And you know without being told that each of those feathers is worth more than most people earn in a year. His earlobes are stretched around jade plugs the size of walnuts. The holes permanent modifications that began in childhood. You try not to stare, but he catches your gaze and his lip curls slightly, the way someone might react to finding a stray dog in their garden. The clothing hierarchy is rigid, enforced not just by custom but by law. Commoners, the Macualtin, who form the empire's backbone, wear rough, maguey fibre garments that end at the knee. Anything longer, anything decorated with more than the simplest patterns, marks you as above your station. And that's not just a fashion faux pas, that's punishable by death. You watch a woman hurry past in a simple huipil blouse and wraparound skirt, her feet bare despite the chill morning air, and realise she's dressed exactly as she must, no more and no less. A merchant follows, his clothing slightly finer cotton instead of maguey, a privilege he's earned through the Pochteca trading class, though even his garments remain undecorated. He wears sandals at least, the straps crossing his ankles in patterns that you suspect signal which guild he belongs to. Your own clothing is catastrophically wrong. The fabric is too uniform, the cut too foreign, the lack of any identifying markers too suspicious. You might as well be naked. Worse, actually, because nakedness would at least be honest. This is confusion wrapped in ignorance, and people notice. A group of young warriors you can tell by their partially shaved heads, and the quilted Ixcahuipili armour they wear even off-duty, slow their conversation to watch you pass. One says something that makes the others laugh, and you don't need a translation to catch the mockery in his tone. You keep walking, eyes forward, trying to project confidence you absolutely don't feel. The body modification goes far beyond clothing. Everyone around you has undergone ritual alterations that began in infancy. Babies' heads were placed between boards to create the elongated skull shape considered beautiful, necessary, proper. You spot a woman whose forehead slopes back at an angle that looks painful but is perfectly normal here. Her profile matching the ideal displayed on every temple carving and painted codex. Teeth are filed and inlaid with precious stones, jade for the wealthy, obsidian for warriors, pyrite for priests. You watch a man smile and see his canines gleaming with green stone, his grin transformed into something simultaneously beautiful and unsettling. Your own teeth are boringly intact, unmodified, marking you as either very poor or very foreign, neither of which improves your standing. And then there's the blood. Not flowing in the streets, nothing so dramatic but present in subtler ways that become impossible to ignore once you notice them. A merchant's forearms are crossed with thin scars, parallel lines that pattern his skin like dark embroidery. A woman waiting by a canal has similar marks on her earlobes, her shins, the backs of her calves. These aren't battle wounds or accidents. These are offerings. The physical proof that you fed the gods with your own essence, that you've participated in the sacred exchange that keeps the sun rising and the world turning. Historians still argue whether bloodletting was purely religious or served social functions to a way to prove devotion, to signal participation in the cosmic order, but here on the ground, the answer doesn't matter. What matters is that everyone does it, and you don't have a single scar to show. You pass a group of children playing near a canal, and they stop to gawk at you with the unfiltered curiosity only children possess. One points at your face, your unblemished, unmodified face, and says something that makes her friends giggle. Their mothers quickly shush them, shooting you apologetic glances that somehow make you feel worse. Even the children know you're wrong. The social hierarchy extends beyond appearance into gesture and space. You watch a commoner encounter a noble on a narrow walkway, and the commoner immediately drops his eyes, presses himself against the wall, practically tries to disappear into the stonework until the noble passes. No one told him to do this. No guard enforced it. The behaviour is so ingrained it might as well be instinct, bred into the bones over generations. You file this away, don't make eye contact with anyone dressed better than you, which is essentially everyone. Keep to the edges, be small, be invisible, survive. But invisibility has its own dangers. A hand grabs your arm, fingers digging in with surprising strength, and you spin to find an older man examining you with intense focus. He's dressed simply, his clothing marking him as a commoner, but his bearing suggests authority of a different sort. He speaks in rapid Nahuatl, his tone questioning, and when you don't respond, he switches to something else, a different dialect maybe, or another language entirely from one of the Empire's conquered territories. You shake your head, spread your hands in the universal gesture of incomprehension, and his eyes narrow. He shouts something, and two younger men materialize from the crowd, both looking at you with expressions you recognize as the same look slave catchers wear in every culture, every era. Because that's what you look like to them, a slave. Someone without markings, without affiliation, without the clothing that declares their place in the world. And in Tenochtitlan, slaves are property, tradable commodities that move through the markets like corn or cotton. Some are criminals working off debts, others prisoners of war, still others sold by their own families during desperate times. The truly unfortunate are slaves by birth, children of slaves who inherit their parents' status the way others inherit land or titles. You could be any of these, without proof otherwise. Why wouldn't they assume you pull free and walk faster? Your heart hammering, very aware of how quickly this situation could deteriorate. The men follow for a dozen paces, then seem to lose interest or decide you're not worth the trouble. But the encounter rattles you, strips away another layer of naive confidence. You're not just an observer here. You're a piece on a board whose rules you don't understand, and every move you make could trigger consequences you can't predict. The body language is equally foreign. People gesture in ways that mean nothing to you, a particular hand motion that makes a vendor immediately look away, a posture that causes others to give someone wide berth. You try to mimic what you see, copying the neutral stance of people waiting by canal boats. But you must get something wrong, because a woman hisses at you, actually hisses, and hurries away like you've just cursed her family. What did you do? Accidentally propositioned her, insulted her gods, challenged someone to ritual combat? You have no idea, and that ignorance is more dangerous than any weapon. Do you remember trying to navigate high school cliques, figuring out which lunch table was safe, which hallway belonged to which social group, this is that? Except the penalties for getting it wrong aren't embarrassment, they're slavery, sacrifice, or a quiet drowning in the canals after dark when no one's watching. Every interaction is a test you didn't study for, and failing is always an option. A procession suddenly fills the street, forcing you against a wall as priests march past, their unmistakable hair matted with blood that's never been washed out, fingernails grown long and dark with accumulated offerings, their black robes stiff with substances you don't want to identify. They carry incense burners that pour smoke into the morning air, and the smell is sweet and cloying and makes your stomach turn. The crowd around you immediately drops into postures of reverence, heads bowed, and you copy them a half-second too late. One priest glances your way, his eyes meeting yours for just an instant, and what you see there isn't anger or curiosity, it's assessment. He's measuring you, calculating something according to criteria you'll never understand. And then he's passed, the moment over, leaving you shaking against the wall with the certainty that you just barely avoided something terrible. Your stomach growls, a sharp reminder that you haven't eaten since before stepping into this world, and you realize with dawning horror that finding food here won't be as simple as pointing at something appetizing. The street vendors who line every canal and corner offer cuisines that smell simultaneously enticing and alien, and you have no idea what's safe to eat, what will make you violently ill, or what might accidentally violate some taboo you've never heard of. You approach a woman tending a clay griddle balanced over a small fire, watching her pat rounds of dough into flat circles that she cooks until they bubble and char. Tortillas. You think with relief, surely those are safe. Universal, harmless. She sees you watching and speaks a price you don't understand, holding up fingers in a counting system that doesn't match anything you know. You fumble with the small copper pieces you've somehow acquired, probably too many, and she takes them with an expression that suggests you've just wildly overpaid for breakfast. The tortilla is nothing like what you expect. It's made from nixtamalized corn soaked in lime water to break down the kernel's structure, and the process gives it a flavour that's simultaneously earthy and mineral, with none of the fluffy texture you associate with bread. You chew slowly, and it's not bad exactly, just profoundly different. The kind of different that reminds you that corn in this world hasn't been bred for sweetness or tenderness. This is corn as a tool of survival, optimized for nutrition and storage, not pleasure. The woman offers you something to go with it, a bowl of watery gruel that she ladles from a larger pot, and you accept because refusing feels dangerous. The first sip hits your tongue and you barely suppress a grimace. It's amaranth. The tiny seeds boiled into a paste that tastes like grass clippings mixed with pond water, with none of the salt or seasoning that might make it palatable. But salt is expensive here, worth its weight in the cacao beans that serve as currency, and seasoning beyond basic chili peppers is a luxury most people can't afford. You force down the amaranth because your body needs fuel, and you watch others eating theirs with apparent enjoyment, which makes you feel even more alien. A man beside you adds a handful of Chapuline's roasted grasshoppers to his bowl, crunching through them with obvious satisfaction, and when he notices you staring, he holds out the bag in offering. You shake your head perhaps too quickly, and he shrugs, popping another insect into his mouth. The crispy legs stick out between his teeth for a moment before he chews them down. The market district sprawls ahead, and you follow the crowd toward Tlatelolco, the northern sister city that hosts the Empire's greatest marketplace. The scale of it staggers you. 60,000 people on a normal day. They say twice that during festival periods, all concentrated in a plaza that could swallow a dozen football fields. Canoes cluster at the canal edges, their loads being transferred to vendors' stalls in a constant flow of goods. You see cotton bales from the hot lands, cacao pods from the south, obsidian blades from the volcanic highlands, feathers from birds you've never heard of, alive in cages or already processed into the elaborate decorations that noble families demand, jade glitters in one stall, worked into beads and pendants. Another vendor displays copper bells that chime in the breeze. A third has stacked animal skins, jaguar, puma, deer that wealthy warriors will convert into ceremonial costumes. And then there's the food. Stalls devoted entirely to chili peppers, with varieties ranging from mild to weapons grade, their colours spanning green to red to almost black. Tomatoes piled in pyramids, though these are smaller and more acidic than anything from your time. Avocados, yes. Finally, something familiar, except they're mostly pits with thin layers of flesh. Not the cultivated abundance, you know. Vendors sell live turkeys, their gobbles adding to the market's cacophony. Hairless dogs roast on spits, their skin crackling, and you have to look away because the cognitive dissonance is too much. You love dogs. These people eat them. Both truths exist simultaneously, and neither cares about your comfort. A vendor catches your eye. Literally, she steps into your path and holds up a cup of liquid so dark it's almost black. Cacao. You realise chocolate, except it's nothing like the candy bars you grew up with. This is unsweetened, bitter enough to make your mouth pucker, and mixed with chili powder that burns on the way down. The Aztecs haven't discovered sugarcane yet, won't for decades, so their chocolate is purely adult, purely ceremonial, a drink for warriors before battle and nobles during rituals. You take a sip to be polite and immediately regret it. The bitterness is overwhelming, the chili makes your eyes water, and the woman laughs at your expression, says something to her neighbour that probably translates to watch the foreigner suffer. Historians still argue whether cacao's value came from its scarcity, its psychoactive properties it contains theobromine, a mild stimulant, or its ritual significance. But standing here, forcing down this liquid that tastes like punishment, you think maybe all three explanations are correct. The drink isn't meant to be enjoyed in the way you understand enjoyment. It's meant to be consumed, to mark occasions, to signal status. The fact that it tastes terrible is almost the point. You try other foods as the morning wears on, each one a small adventure in survival. Tamales steamed in corn husks, their fillings ranging from beans to fish, to things you can't identify and probably don't want to. Atoll. A hot corn-based drink that's slightly less offensive than the amaranth gruel, but still tastes like someone liquefied cardboard. Nepal's cactus paddles sliced and cooked until they release a slime that coats your mouth in a way that makes you want to scrape your tongue. A vendor offers you escamoles, ant larvae harvested from agave roots, calling them the caviar of insects. Though of course she doesn't use that word because caviar doesn't exist in this hemisphere. You decline. She insists. You decline again, more firmly, and she finally lets you pass with a look that suggests you're missing out on a delicacy. Do you remember the first time you tried coffee? How bitter and strange it tasted. How you couldn't understand why adults liked it. How you had to train yourself to appreciate it. Multiply that learning curve by 100. Every food here requires acquired taste, cultural context, and often a cast-iron stomach. The Aztec diet is heavily plant-based not by choice, but by necessity. The empire has no cattle, no pigs, no sheep, and the few protein sources available are either wild game, turkey, or fish. Beans and corn provide most calories, supplemented by vegetables, fruits, and yes, insects, which are actually an efficient protein source even if your modern sensibilities rebel at the thought. Your stomach, meanwhile, is staging its own rebellion. The water you drank earlier, pulled from a canal that seemed clean enough, is now making its opinions known through a series of ominous gurgles. The Aztecs have built sophisticated aqueducts to bring fresh water from springs on the mainland. But you don't know where those public fountains are. And the canals that web through the city are used for transportation, waste disposal, and drinking, often simultaneously. The same water that carries goods from the Chinampas, the floating gardens that feed the city, also receives human waste from the public latrines. Even though the Aztecs are meticulous about collecting this waste for fertilizer, it's a system that works for people with local immunities, local gut bacteria, local resistance to parasites that have co-evolved with the population for generations. You have none of those advantages. Your microbiome is tuned to chlorinated water and pasteurized milk and food safety standards that won't be invented for centuries. The amoebas and bacteria in that canal water are treating your intestines like an all-you-can-eat buffet, and you feel the first cramps beginning. The warning signs that you're going to become very familiar with the Aztec sanitation system whether you want to or not. A merchant passes carrying what looks like fresh fruit tejocoats, small yellow orbs that resemble crab apples. You buy several with gestures and copper pieces, thinking maybe something raw and acidic will settle your stomach. The first bite makes you wince. They're astringent, almost unbearably sour. The kind of fruit you'd never eat in your time except maybe cooked into jam with several pounds of sugar added. But here, this is dessert. This is the sweet treat people save for special occasions. You eat them anyway because your body desperately needs vitamins, and scurvy is just one more thing you have to worry about now. The smell of cooking meat draws you to another stall, where a vendor tends strips of venison drying over a smoky fire. Your mouth waters finally. Something familiar. Something that looks like actual protein. But when you try to buy some, the vendor shakes his head, pointing at your clothes, your lack of decoration. Speaking words you eventually understand through context mean not for you. This is meat for warriors, for people who've earned it through service or status, and you're neither. The vendor turns away, and you stand there feeling hunger mix with humiliation, understanding that even food has hierarchies here, that calories themselves are rationed according to cosmic law. The drums wake you before dawn, or rather, they prevent you from truly sleeping at all. You found a corner near a canal to spend the night, curled against a wall with your arms wrapped round your knees, and the sound of ritual percussion has been constant since midnight, echoing across the water from the temple district. Now, as the sky shifts from black to deep blue, the drums grow louder, more insistent, and you watch the city transform around you as people emerge from their homes to participate in morning devotions that aren't optional, aren't casual, aren't anything like the Sunday services you might skip back home. This is obligation written into the fabric of reality, and everyone moves with a practiced synchronization of people who've performed these rituals since they could walk. You follow a crowd toward a neighborhood temple, not the grand Templo Mayor that dominates the skyline, but one of the hundreds of smaller pyramid temples that dot the city like punctuation marks. The structure rises 4 stories. Its steps steep enough that people climb using their hands. Its summit crowned with a shrine that's already smoking with incense. A priest stands at the top, his silhouette dark against the lightening sky. And as you watch, he raises a conch-shell trumpet to his lips and blows a note that seems to vibrate in your chest cavity. The crowd around you immediately responds, thousands of people speaking in unison, words you don't know directed at gods you've never met, and the hair on your arms stands up because this isn't theatre. This is belief made audible, faith so absolute it doesn't require proof. The priest descends halfway down the pyramid, carrying a bowl of burning copal resin that pours sweet smoke into the morning air. People line up, and you realize with growing dread that they are preparing to offer blood. Not sacrificial blood, not yet. Not here, but personal blood. The daily tribute that keeps the cosmic machinery turning. A woman in front of you pulls a maguey thorn from a small pouch and calmly pierces her earlobe, catching the drops in a piece of bark paper that she'll burn as offering. The man beside her uses an obsidian blade to open small cuts on his forearm, his face showing no more emotion than if he were brushing his teeth. A teenager struggles slightly. This is perhaps his first time performing the ritual alone, but his father guides his hand, shows him the proper angle, the proper depth, the proper prayers that transform pain into devotion. You're expected to participate. Eyes turn toward you, waiting, and the priest's gaze finds you in the crowd with the precision of a hunting hawk spotting prey. He says something, a question or command, and when you don't respond, he repeats it. Louder. And now everyone is looking at you, this stranger who stands mute while the gods wait for their breakfast. Your heart pounds. You have no thorn, no blade, no idea what words to speak, even if you could force yourself to draw your own blood. The crowd's mood shifts subtly, curiosity becoming suspicion, becoming something harder, and you back away, mumbling apologies in a language no one speaks, and flee down a side street while whispers chase you like physical things. But you can't escape the rituals, because they're everywhere, woven into every moment of the day. At noon, you watch people pause whatever they're doing, merchants mid-haggle, porters mid-step. Women mid-weave to face east and make gestures toward the sun. Historians still argue whether these breaks were strictly enforced by law or simply followed by universal custom. But the distinction seems meaningless when you watch an entire city synchronize like a single organism responding to cosmic cues. You don't know the gestures, don't know the timing, and so you stand frozen while life flows around you, marked again as outsider, as impious, as suspicious. The calendar governs everything with a complexity that makes your head hurt. The Aztecs don't use one calendar, they use two, running simultaneously. A 260-day ritual calendar called the Tonalpohualli, and a 365-day solar calendar called the Xupahualli. And the interplay between them creates cycles within cycles that determine lucky days, unlucky days, days for planting, days for war, days when certain gods demand attention and others must be carefully ignored. You have no idea which day this is in either system, which means you can't predict what tomorrow holds or what yesterday meant. And that temporal blindness is more disorienting than you'd think possible. A merchant refuses to sell to you in the afternoon, and through gestures and patient repetition you eventually understand it's because today is unlucky for new transactions, for initiating relationships, for anything that binds future to present. Tomorrow, he indicates. Come back tomorrow. But tomorrow might be unlucky for something else. Might be a festival day when the markets close. Might be one of the Nemontemi, the 5 empty days at the end of the solar year when the gods turn their faces away and people huddle indoors, not even lighting fires for fear of attracting malevolent attention. You witness a naming ceremony in a plaza, where a baby exactly 4 days old, you gather from the participants' careful explanations to each other, receives their name from a priest who's consulted the Tonalpohualli to determine the child's destiny. The day you're born determines your personality, your career prospects, your compatibility with potential spouses, your likelihood of dying young or living long. It's astrology cranked up to maximum and taken absolutely seriously by an empire that's conquered half a continent. And the cognitive dissonance makes you dizzy. How can such superstition coexist with such sophistication? How can the same culture that builds precise astronomical observatories also believe that being born on day 1 flower means you'll be frivolous and artistic? But then you remember that your own era, with all its technological marvels, still has people checking horoscopes, avoiding black cats, knocking on wood, and suddenly the distance between you and the Aztecs doesn't seem quite so vast. The religious obligations compound throughout the day. You're supposed to offer food to household gods before eating a pinch of tortilla, a drop of drink, placed in a small shrine or simply left at the corner of your dwelling. You're supposed to greet the sun at dawn and dusk, thank it for returning, beg it to keep fighting through the underworld's darkness. You're supposed to burn copal incense regularly, the smoke carrying your prayers upward where gods might notice. You're supposed to keep track of which gods are ascendant during which weeks, which require elaborate observances and which can be acknowledged with simple gestures. The penalty for neglecting these duties isn't divine punishment, not directly. It's social censure, suspicion that you're unbalancing the cosmic order, that your impiety might contaminate the community and bring disaster on everyone. Do you remember mandatory church attendance as a kid? If you had that experience, how boring the sermons were, how you'd count ceiling tiles or make up games to pass the time. This is nothing like that. This is full participation religion where inattention can get you identified as a sorcerer or foreign spy, where the line between worship and survival is so thin it might not exist at all. A festival procession interrupts the afternoon, and the street fills with dancers wearing costumes that transform them into jaguars, eagles, serpents, gods themselves. They move with trained precision, their steps following patterns laid down generations ago, and the crowd responds with choreographed enthusiasm that you can't fake. When they stop in front of the temple, The dancers perform rituals you don't understand, elaborate pantomimes of cosmic battles, agricultural cycles, the eternal struggle between order and chaos. Musicians play drums, flutes, rattles made from gourds filled with pebbles, creating rhythms that your brain can't quite pass, that seem to exist in time signatures that haven't been invented yet. And then the dancer at the centre of it all, dressed as Xype Totek. The flayed lord removes his outer layer of costume, and you realise with creeping horror that it's not costume at all. It's skin, human skin, tanned and sewn into a suit that he's worn for days or weeks as part of the ritual, letting it decay slowly on his body, and the smell hits you a moment later, sweet and rotten, and you have to turn away before you vomit in the street. The crowd seems unbothered. Children watch with interest. This is normal. This is holy. This is what the flayed lord requires to wear the skin of sacrifice victims, to embody renewal through decay, to remind everyone that life grows from death and nothing is permanent. You stumble away, your stomach churning, and find yourself at the edge of a canal where the water reflects the late afternoon sky. A woman kneels nearby, washing clothing by beating it against stones, and she sings softly as she works a prayer. You realise, thanking Causeways, the goddess of water, for the privilege of using this resource. Even laundry is ritual here. Even the most mundane tasks connect to the divine, require acknowledgement, demand participation in the cosmic exchange. The roar of the crowd pulls you toward the great ball court, where thousands of spectators pack the stone tiers that rise on either side of a playing field, longer than a football pitch but narrower, flanked by walls that slope inward at precise angles calculated by architects who understood physics even if they didn't call it that. You squeeze into the space near the back, and the energy in the air is electric, dangerous, the kind of atmosphere that precedes either celebration or riot with equal probability. On the field below, two teams of athletes warm up, their bodies gleaming with sweat and oil, their hips and knees wrapped in thick leather padding that looks inadequate for what they're about to endure. They're not wearing much else, just loincloths and that protective gear, and you can see the scars that crisscross their legs and torsos, the permanent records of games past, matches survived, bones broken and healed and broken again. The ball itself sits in the centre of the court, and it's not like any ball you've ever seen. It's solid rubber, about the size of a cantaloupe, harvested from trees in the hot southern regions and processed into something with the weight and hardness of a bowling ball. You watch one player bounce it experimentally, and the sound it makes hitting the stone floor is like a gunshot, sharp and final. That ball, you realise with dawning horror, can kill you. It weighs 8 pounds, maybe 10, and when it's moving at full speed, when it's been struck by a hip or knee with the full force of a trained athlete behind it, it becomes a projectile that can shatter ribs, collapse lungs, or crack your skull like an eggshell if it catches you wrong. A priest appears on a platform above the court and calls out prayers you don't understand, invoking gods of sun and maize and war, blessing the game that's about to unfold. The crowd responds in unison, their voices creating a wall of sound that makes your ears ring. Then drums begin. That same rhythm you've heard all day, but faster now, more urgent, and the teams take their positions at opposite ends of the court. The referee, an older man whose own scarred body testifies to decades of play, holds the ball high, shows it to the crowd, to the gods, and then hurls it into play. What follows is controlled chaos, athletic brilliance mixed with barely contained violence. The players move in a crouch, their eyes tracking the ball as it ricochets off walls with unpredictable angles. The rules forbid using hands or feet. You can only strike the ball with your hips, knees, elbows, or head, which transforms every touch into a full-body commitment, every play into a calculated risk. You watch a player take the ball on his hip and the impact is audible even over the crowd noise. A meaty thwack that makes you wince. He stumbles but keeps his feet, manages to send the ball arcing toward the opponent's end zone, and his teammates cheer while already repositioning for the return. The game is called Tlachtli, and it's more than sport, it's ritual combat, cosmic reenactment, political theatre, and gambling opportunity, all compressed into a single brutal spectacle. Historians still argue whether the game originated with the Olmecs centuries earlier, or developed independently across Mesoamerica, but here in Tenochtitlan it's reached its apotheosis, transformed into something that combines the strategy of chess with the physicality of rugby and the stakes of Russian roulette. The ball represents the sun, you've heard, and the players are gods battling to keep it moving across the sky, preventing the darkness from consuming everything. But it's also just a game, just a competition between neighbourhoods or cities or tribute states, with pride and sometimes territories hanging in the balance. The crowd around you is deeply invested, screaming encouragement or abuse, their bodies swaying with every play. You spot nobles in the better seats making hand signals to each other, bets being placed. Odds being calculated while commoners around you simply root for their team with a fervour that suggests personal stakes. A man beside you explains something in rapid Nahuatl, pointing at players, at the stone rings mounted high on each wall near the centre of the court. You've seen those rings, carved stone hoops barely wider than the ball itself. Positioned 20 feet up, and through his gestures you understand that getting the ball through one of these rings wins the game instantly. It also almost never happens, maybe once in 100 matches, because the difficulty is astronomical, like making a half-court basketball shot while only using your hip. Then a player goes down hard, taking the ball full in the chest, and the sound he makes is horrible, a wet gasping that cuts through the crowd noise like a knife. His teammates immediately surround him while the referee stops play, and you watch them prop him up, trying to get him breathing again, the skin of his chest already purpling with what must be catastrophic bruising. He waves them off after a minute, staggers to his feet, and signals that he can continue. The crowd erupts in approval. This is courage. This is dedication. This is what the gods demand warriors who play through pain, who risk permanent injury for the honour of their team and the continuation of cosmic order. Do you remember playing schoolyard games, skinning your knee and running to the nurse for a band-aid? These athletes are operating at a different level of sacrifice, where injury isn't an unfortunate accident but an expected cost of participation. The padding they wear helps, but only marginally. There's no protection for their internal organs, their kidneys and liver taking repeated impacts that would hospitalise modern athletes. Some players develop chronic pain so severe they can barely walk by their 30s. Others die on the court, their hearts stopped by a ball strike in exactly the wrong place, at exactly the wrong moment. But still they play, because glory outweighs safety, because the alternative is a life of anonymous toil in the Chinampas or tribute collection, and at least here you can die famous. The match continues, and you start to perceive the strategy beneath the chaos. Teams work in coordination, setting up shots, defending their end zone, trying to force opponents into mistakes. One player specialises in defensive positioning, his body always between the ball and his team's goal. Another is clearly the scorer, taking risks, launching himself at difficult angles, absorbing punishment to create opportunities. The rubber ball leaves welts wherever it strikes, red marks that bloom into bruises even as you watch, and the players ignore them with the focus of people who've trained their entire nervous systems to disregard anything that doesn't immediately threaten death. Then something shifts in the crowd's energy, a darkening that you feel before you understand. The team in red, you've been thinking of them as the home team. though you have no idea if that's accurate, is losing, and losing badly, and the spectators' encouragement has curdled into something uglier. People near you mutter to each other, shooting glances at the losing players that carry weight you can't quite interpret. The man who explained the rules earlier leans close and speaks a single word that he accompanies with a throat-cutting gesture. And your blood goes cold because you suddenly understand what's at stake here. Not every game ends in sacrifice. Most don't. In fact, Tlachtli is played constantly throughout the Empire, in cities and villages, for recreation and settlement of disputes, and most matches conclude with nothing more dramatic than bragging rights and transferred goods. But this game, this particular match in the Great Ball Court of Tenochtitlan with priests in attendance and nobles watching from their elevated seats, this one might be different. The losing team might be captives from a recent conquest, playing for their lives, or they might be volunteers, champions who accepted the risk because winning brings rewards beyond measureland, titles, the gratitude of the Empire. The ambiguity is part of the design, because not knowing sharpens the spectacle, makes every moment carry existential weight. The red team rallies, their desperation translating into reckless brilliance. And they manage to score, tying the game with a shot that sends the ball careening into the opponent's end zone. The crowd explodes in noise, half cheering and half booing, and the tension ratchets even higher. You're gripping the stone bench beneath you hard enough that your fingers ache, caught up despite yourself in the drama unfolding below. The final minutes are frantic, both teams exhausted, making mistakes, the ball moving in increasingly unpredictable patterns as coordination breaks down under fatigue. Then one of the blue team players, a stocky athlete who's been limping for the last 10 minutes, positions himself perfectly, reads the ball's trajectory off the wall, and strikes with his hip in a motion so clean it looks choreographed. The ball arcs upward, impossibly high, and you watch it sail toward the stone ring on the side wall, and time seems to stretch as it approaches, as it reaches the opening, as it somehow, impossibly, passes through. The crowd goes silent for a heartbeat, shock overriding all other reactions, because what just happened isn't supposed to happen, is the kind of thing people talk about for generations. Then the noise returns tenfold, a wall of sound that physically hurts, and the blue team collapses on the court in relief or celebration or sheer disbelief, while the red team kneels in defeat, their heads bowed, their fate now in the hands of the nobles and priests who'll decide whether this loss requires ultimate payment. The marketplace at Tlatelolco sprawls before you again, but this time you're not a curious observer sampling strange foods, you're attempting to actually participate in commerce. And the difference is profound. You have a few copper pieces left, enough to buy maybe a day's worth of basic supplies. But the transaction process is unlike anything you've encountered. There are no price tags, no fixed costs, no universal understanding of value that you can exploit. Every purchase requires negotiation conducted in a language you don't speak, following customs you don't understand, with penalties for mistakes that range from public humiliation to criminal prosecution. You approach a vendor selling basic cloth, pointing at a small piece of Maguey fibre fabric that might serve as a blanket or extra clothing layer. The vendor sizes you up with practiced efficiency, taking in your foreign appearance, your ignorance, your desperation, and quotes a price you think that involves holding up fingers and gesturing at your copper pieces in a way that suggests she wants all of them. You shake your head, hold up fewer fingers, and her expression hardens. She launches into rapid nahuatl that sounds accusatory, and other vendors nearby pause their own transactions to watch. You've insulted her. You realise, though you're not sure how was your counteroffer too low, too high, delivered with the wrong body language. Made on an inauspicious day, the market has rules. Formal codes enforced not by guards with weapons, but by judges who patrol the plaza in distinctive regalia, settling disputes on the spot with authority that brooks no appeal. You spot 3 of them near the centre of the marketplace. Seated on a raised platform with a clear view of the surrounding stalls, and merchants and customers alike keep them in peripheral vision at all times, modulating their behaviour to stay within acceptable bounds. The Aztec legal system is famously harsh, operating on principles that prioritise order and cosmic balance over individual circumstances. And the judges here have power to levy fines, confiscate goods, or sentence offenders to slavery for infractions that seem minor to your modern sensibilities. Theft is punishable by death or permanent enslavement, no middle ground, no rehabilitation programs, no consideration of mitigating factors like poverty or desperation. You watch a young boy get caught slipping a handful of cacao beans into his clothing, and within seconds 2 market guards have him by the arms, dragging him toward the judge's platform while his mother runs behind them, pleading in a voice that cuts through the marketplace noise. The judges listen to the vendor's accusation, examine the evidence the beans still clutched in the boy's fist, and render judgment so quickly it feels automated. The boy is now property of the vendor he tried to steal from, his labour owed for a period determined by the value of the theft. His mother collapses, wailing, and people step around her without much interest because this scene plays out regularly, predictably. The machinery of justice grinding forward without sentiment. You back away from your cloth negotiation, suddenly terrified of making a mistake that could have legal consequences. The vendor watches you retreat with an expression that might be satisfaction or contempt, and you realise you've just been tested and found wanting, marked as someone who doesn't understand the basic protocols of market interaction. Other vendors will have noticed. Word spreads quickly in this concentrated space, and your reputation already damaged by your foreign appearance and inability to communicate has taken another hit. The marketplace operates on a barter economy, overlaid with standardised currency units based on cacao beans, cotton cloaks called quachtli, and small copper axes that serve as change, but the exchange rates fluctuate based on season, supply, the quality of individual items, and factors you can't perceive. A cotton cloak might trade for anywhere from 65 to 300 cacao beans depending on its weave, dye, and the negotiating skills of the participants. You have copper pieces but no cloaks, some cacao beans you acquired somehow but not enough to matter, and absolutely no framework for determining whether any price you're quoted is reasonable or exploitative. Historians still argue whether the Aztec economy was more socialist or capitalist in structure, whether the state's heavy involvement in resource distribution and price controls made it fundamentally different from European markets, or whether the profit motive and private enterprise that clearly existed made it essentially similar. Standing here, watching transactions unfold with Byzantine complexity, you think maybe both perspectives are simultaneously correct and insufficient, that the economy operates according to logics that don't map cleanly onto modern categories. A commotion erupts 3 stalls down, where a merchant is being accused of using false measures, a hollowed gourd that appears larger than it is, shorting customers on grain. The judges arrive within minutes, their presence parting the crowd like a knife through water. They examine the evidence, test the measure against a standard kept at their platform, and find the merchant guilty. The sentence is immediate and public, 20 lashes delivered right there in the marketplace. The merchant stripped to the waist and tied to a post while a guard administers the punishment with a length of rope. You turn away after the first strike, but you can't escape the sound, the crack of rope on flesh, the merchant's grunts that evolve into screams, the crowd's satisfied murmurs that suggest justice is being properly served. Do you remember getting detention for talking in class? How unfair it felt, how disproportionate the punishment seemed. The Aztec legal system operates on a completely different calculus. where maintaining social order and cosmic balance requires swift, severe consequences for violations. There's no presumption of innocence, no right to legal representation, no appeals process. Justice is direct, visible, and designed to deter through fear rather than rehabilitate through understanding. It works, in the sense that the marketplace functions smoothly most of the time, that disputes are resolved quickly, that most people stay within the lines because the alternative is too terrible to contemplate. You finally manage to purchase a small bag of dried beans from a vendor who takes pity on your obvious incompetence, accepting your copper pieces without much negotiation. As she hands over the goods, she says something that sounds like advice, her tone almost maternal, and you wish desperately that you could understand her. She points at your clothing, at the sun moving across the sky, at the temple district in the distance, and you gather she's warning you about something, that you need better clothes, that you need to complete some ritual before sundown, that you're in danger you don't even recognize. You nod to show appreciation, and she sighs, pats your arm, and turns to her next customer. The market patrol shifts as afternoon stretches toward evening, the judges rotating out for a fresh crew, and you notice the new arrivals are accompanied by more guards, their weapons visible and ready. The marketplace becomes slightly more tense, transactions speeding up as vendors begin packing their most valuable items, storing them away against the possibility of theft during the vulnerable transition period. Crime increases at dusk, apparently, when the light fails and the god's attention wanes, and smart merchants know to minimize their exposure. You spot a fight breaking out near the pottery stalls, two men grappling over what appears to be a disputed transaction, and guards converge with practiced efficiency. They don't separate the combatants gently or attempt de-escalation through dialogue. They simply strike both men with wooden clubs until they stop moving, drag them to the judge's platform, and await instruction. The judges don't even ask for both sides of the story. Fighting in the marketplace violates the sacred space's sanctity, and both participants are guilty by definition. They're sentenced to 3 days in wooden stocks at the plaza's edge, their heads and hands locked in place, exposed to weather and public ridicule as warning to others. The casual brutality is exhausting. The constant threat of sudden judgment draining your emotional reserves faster than the physical challenges of navigating this world. You're walking on legal eggshells you can't see, surrounded by laws you don't know, watched by enforcement mechanisms that view ignorance as irrelevant. Intent doesn't matter here, only outcome. You didn't mean to insult that vendor, but you did. And only her personal choice not to involve the judges saved you from consequences you can't even imagine. The drums begin again at dawn, but this time their rhythm is different, sharper, more martial, calling not to prayer but to assembly. You follow the crowd toward the great plaza, where thousands of people gather in formation, and you realize with sinking dread that today is a day of military ceremony, a celebration of conquest, a reminder that the Aztec Empire wasn't built through diplomacy or trade agreements, but through systematic warfare that operates according to principles completely alien to your understanding of conflict. Warriors fill the plaza's center, arranged by rank and achievement, their bodies decorated with paint and feathers that tell stories of captives taken, battles survived, enemies killed. The most decorated among them wear full jaguar or eagle costumes, the heads of the animals fitted over their own like helmets, the pelts or feathers cascading down their backs in displays that are simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. A procession enters from the causeway warriors returning from what you gather was a successful raid into neighbouring territory, and they're herding captives before them. Men and women and even some children bound with rope at their wrists, stumbling forward under the fate of defeat. The crowd cheers, not with the bloodlust you might expect, but with something more complex, a mixture of triumph and religious satisfaction. Because these captives aren't just prisoners of war, they're offerings, fuel for the cosmic engine, necessary components in the bargain that keeps the sun rising and the crops growing and the empire expanding. The Aztec conception of warfare is called Xochitlán, the Flower Wars, and the term itself reveals the fundamental disconnect between their worldview and yours. War isn't about killing enemies on the battlefield, isn't about seizing territory or breaking opposing armies. War is about capturing live prisoners who can be brought back to Tenochtitlan for sacrifice. Because dead enemies are worthless, but living ones can feed the gods. Warriors are judged not by how many opponents they've slain, but by how many they've captured. And the most prestigious achievement is taking a prisoner single-handedly, without assistance, bringing them back alive and intact for the priest to use. This means Aztec warfare is fundamentally non-lethal on the battlefield. Armies clash with clubs and obsidian-edged swords designed to wound and incapacitate rather than kill, with the goal of overwhelming and subduing rather than slaughtering. Historians still argue whether this made Aztec warfare more or less brutal than European conflicts, whether the focus on capture reduced battlefield deaths or simply deferred them to temple altars. But standing here watching captives parade past with their eyes downcast and their futures measured in days, you think the distinction might be academic? A warrior near you notices your attention and mistakes it for interest rather than horror. He's young, maybe 20, with fresh scars on his arms and a single captive feather woven into his hair, the mark of someone who's taken his first prisoner. He speaks to you in Nahuatl, gesturing at the captives, at his own decorated body, and you understand from his tone and posture that he's boasting, that capturing an enemy is his greatest achievement, the moment his life gained meaning and status. His family will have celebrated for days when he returned. His name will be recorded in the community's oral history, and he's now eligible for advancement in the military hierarchy that offers one of the few paths upward through Aztec society's rigid stratification. The emphasis on capture rather than killing creates a warfare culture that seems almost sporting to modern eyes, with rules and protocols that both sides understand and generally follow. Before battles, challenges are issued, dates and locations agreed upon, sometimes even the number of participants predetermined. The Flower Wars between the Aztec Triple Alliance and the independent states of Tlaxcala and Cholula happen on regular schedules, like athletic competitions, with both sides fielding warriors who need prisoners for their own religious obligations. It's mutually beneficial warfare, a system that provides both sides with the captives their gods demand, while minimizing the economic disruption of total war. But this cooperation doesn't make it gentle. You watch the captives more closely and see that many are injured, broken fingers, split lips, limbs bent at wrong angles that suggest bones shattered during capture. The warriors didn't kill them, true, but they didn't handle them delicately either. These are people who fought desperately to avoid this fate, who understood exactly what capture meant, and who now face a future measured in ritual preparation followed by a death that will be both public and agonizing. A nobleman mounts the platform at the plaza's center and begins a speech that the crowd receives with rapt attention. You catch none of the words, but understand the general thrust from context and crowd reaction. These captives are from Tlaxcala, the independent state that's resisted Aztec dominance for decades, that's surrounded by tribute territories but refuses to submit, that provides the empire with a convenient enemy for these ritualized conflicts. Taking Tlaxcalan prisoners is particularly prestigious because their warriors are famously fierce, trained from childhood in the same rigorous military traditions that define Aztec society. Do you remember playing Capture the Flag as a kid? How exciting it was to catch someone from the opposing team. These warriors are playing a version where the losers don't just lose points, they lose their hearts. Literally, on temple altars designed for exactly that purpose. And yet the game continues, generation after generation, both sides participating in a system that seems insane from the outside, but makes perfect internal sense once you accept the fundamental premise: the gods are hungry. The sun needs blood to keep moving, and warfare is the mechanism by which the universe maintains balance. The captives are led away toward the temple district, where they'll be housed and fed pampered, even because damaged goods make poor offerings until the next major festival day provides appropriate context for their deaths. Some will wait weeks, others months, living in a strange limbo where they're simultaneously honoured guests and condemned prisoners. The psychological torture of this waiting period might be worse than immediate execution, but from the Aztec perspective it's necessary ritual preparation, allowing the captives to embody the gods they'll eventually represent in the sacrifice ceremony. You notice something else unsettling. Some of the warriors in the plaza are very young, barely teenagers, and they're being addressed by older veterans who gesture at the captives, at the temples, at the young warriors' own bodies. This is training. You realize instruction in the arts of capture and combat, delivered through direct demonstration. Aztec boys begin military preparation around age 10, attending special schools called Telpochcali, where they learn weapon handling, battlefield tactics, religious obligations, and the supreme importance of taking prisoners. By 15 they are expected to have captured their first enemy, and those who fail face social stigma so severe it affects their marriage prospects, their career options, their entire future trajectory. The pressure to capture creates its own problems. Young warriors take increasingly reckless risks, launching themselves into dangerous situations to prove their courage, and many die in the attempt. Others form partnerships, multiple warriors ganging up on single opponents to ensure success. But these shared captures are worth less in the status calculus than solo achievements. The whole system is designed to channel male aggression and ambition into forms that serve the state's religious and political needs, transforming potentially destabilizing energy into controlled violence that expands the empire while feeding the gods. A commotion near the plaza's edge draws your attention. One of the captives has broken free, somehow slipping his bonds, and he's running toward the causeway with desperate speed while guards give chase. The crowd gasps, then surges in the same direction, everyone wanting to see how this drama resolves. You're carried along by the momentum, pressed between bodies that smell of sweat and smoke and excitement, and you catch glimpses of the fleeing captive as he dodges between buildings, leaps a canal, tries to blend into the morning market crowd. But there's no blending, not with his bound wrists and painted body and the sheer terror radiating from him, and within minutes guards have him surrounded, have struck him down with their clubs, are dragging him back toward the plaza while the crowd cheers their efficiency. The nobleman on the platform receives the recaptured prisoner with theatrical disappointment, speaking words that draw laughter from the assembled thousands. You gather from reactions that the escape attempt has made this captive more valuable, not less his spirit. His refusal to accept fate makes him worthier as offering. The gods prefer courage, apparently, even in their sacrifices. Night falls over Tenochtitlan like a curtain dropping, and the city transforms into something older, something that operates by rules even more alien than those governing daylight hours. The temple district becomes the centre of activity, pyramids silhouetted against the darkening sky, their summits crowned with fires that never go out, flames fed constantly by priests whose entire lives revolve around maintaining these sacred blazes. The smoke rises in columns that twist and merge overhead, and the smell that drifts down on the evening breeze is complex copal incense, burning pine, and underneath those pleasant scents something else, something organic and wrong that makes your stomach clench even though your conscious mind refuses to name it. You found a vantage point on the rooftop garden, one of thousands that dot the city's skyline, where someone is growing squash and beans in raised beds, and doesn't seem to mind your presence as long as you stay quiet and still. From here you can see the Templo Mayor in its full glory, the twin pyramids rising in geometric perfection, one dedicated to Tlaloc the rain god, the other to Huitzilopochtli, the war god. And both of them active tonight with ceremonies that draw streams of people up those steep staircases like ants climbing to feed their queen. The drums you've been hearing all day intensify as darkness deepens, joined by flutes and conch shell trumpets that create a soundscape simultaneously haunting and hypnotic. Torches flare to life along the pyramid's edges, defining its shape against the night, and you watch priests move in choreographed patterns at the summit, their black robes making them almost invisible except when they pass in front of flames. The ceremonies have begun, the nightly rituals that feed the gods and convince the sun to return tomorrow, and you understand with cold clarity that you're about to witness something your modern sensibilities are completely unprepared for. A procession winds up the southern pyramid, Huitzilopochtli's temple, and even from this distance you can identify the captives from this morning, painted blue now, decorated with paper ornaments, moving with the slow reluctance of people who know exactly where they're going and what awaits them there. They're accompanied by priests, warriors, musicians, and what appears to be their own families from Tlaxcala, because the Aztecs believe sacrifice is an honor that deserves witnesses, that the victim's relatives should be present to see their loved one transformed into divine sustenance, to participate in the cosmic exchange. The first captive reaches the summit, and the drums suddenly stop, creating a silence so profound that sounds from across the city, dogs barking, children crying, the lap of water against canal walls become clearly audible. Then a single drum beats, slow and measured, and you watch the captive being positioned on the sacrificial stone, held by 4 priests while a 5th raises an obsidian blade that catches torchlight and seems to drink it in, becoming a shard of frozen night. The blade descends, and even though you're hundreds of yards away, even though the night obscures details, your imagination fills in what you can't see. And you have to look away, have to focus on your own breathing, have to remind yourself that this is their world, their truth, their understanding of how the universe works. The smell intensifies. That's what you can't escape, even from this distance, even with your eyes averted. The smell of copper and offal, of bodies open to the air, of blood in quantities that would flood modern operating rooms. It carries on the wind, mixing with incense in combinations that your brain categorizes as fundamentally wrong, that trigger instincts buried so deep in your evolutionary history you didn't know they existed. Historians still argue about the numbers, how many people the Aztecs sacrificed annually, whether Spanish accounts were exaggerated for propaganda purposes, whether the true figure was hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands. From this rooftop, watching the ceremonies continue through the night, watching procession after procession wind up that pyramid, you think the numbers might not matter as much as the systematic nature of it all, the bureaucratic efficiency with which the Empire converts living humans into offerings, the sheer normality with which everyone participates in or observes these rituals. The priests at the summit work with practiced efficiency, their movements economical and precise, because this is their profession, their calling, what they've trained for since childhood. Being a priest in the Aztec world isn't about comfort or contemplation. It's about blood and smoke and sleep deprivation, about letting your hair grow matted and never washing, about piercing your own flesh daily to feed the gods from your own veins. The priests you've seen throughout the city all carry this appearance gaunt, ascetic, their fingernails grown long and dark, their bodies bearing the scars of decades of self-mortification. They're not gentle scholars or political administrators. They're ritual specialists who've dedicated themselves to maintaining the cosmic bargain. And their work tonight is as essential to Aztec civilization as farming or engineering or warfare. Do you remember religious services from your childhood? How boring they seemed. how you'd fidget through sermons and count minutes until freedom. This is religion without boredom, without abstraction, without metaphor. This is faith made flesh, literally, the gods receiving tangible payment for tangible services, and the directness of it bypasses all your intellectual defences and strikes at something primal. A group of citizens has gathered in the plaza below the temple, and you realise they're participating in their own way, singing hymns that rise to meet the ceremonies above, creating a sonic environment that wraps the whole district in collective devotion. This isn't a spectator sport. Not exactly. Though people do watch, it's more like a community obligation. Everyone contributing what they can, their attention, their prayers, their presence to the great work of keeping the universe functioning. The ceremonies continue for hours, and you find yourself unable to look away despite wanting desperately to do so, trapped by the same horrible fascination that makes people slow down for car accidents. Each captive is treated with reverence up until the final moment, adorned and honoured and sometimes even given pulque, fermented agave alcohol to dull the pain or calm the fear. Some go willingly, having accepted their role in the cosmic drama. Others struggle until the end, their resistance requiring extra priests to hold them steady. The Aztecs don't judge either response, both are acceptable. Both serve the gods' purposes. Between sacrifices, priests perform elaborate dances and songs, reciting the mythology that justifies and explains what's happening. The gods sacrifice themselves to create the sun and moon. You gather from fragments of the ritual language that drift down from the pyramid, and humans must repay that debt through their own sacrifices, maintaining the balance, ensuring the cosmic machinery continues turning. It's a theology of reciprocity, of mutual obligation between divine and mortal realms, and within its own logic it's perfectly consistent, perfectly reasonable. You notice that some of the bodies are being handled carefully after death, carried down the pyramid's other side to destinations you can't see from your vantage point. The flesh will be eaten, you know this from the accounts you've read, though knowing and witnessing are different animals. Not cannibalism in the sense of eating enemies for nutrition or dominance, but ritual consumption, the incorporation of divine essence into human bodies, the closing of the circle that began with the god's original sacrifice. The limbs go to the captor and his family, the torso to the priests and nobles, the head to be displayed on the tzompantli, the skull rack that stands beside every major temple, displaying thousands of skulls in organised rows that testify to the empire's devotion. The night deepens, and the ceremonies show no sign of stopping. You learn later that major festivals can involve sacrifices running continuously for days, the priests working in shifts, the pyramids becoming rivers of blood that flow down the steps and pool at the bottom, where specialised workers clean and channel it according to ritual specifications. Tonight is apparently a minor occasion by comparison, maybe only a few dozen offerings, a regular maintenance ceremony rather than a grand celebration, but even these minor rituals are more than you can process. Your modern mind keeps trying to find frameworks to compare this to other cultures, other practices, other forms of religious violence, but the comparisons all fail because nothing in your experience maps onto what you're witnessing. This isn't the Inquisition's secret tortures or witch burnings done by fearful mobs. This is state-sponsored, religiously mandated, socially celebrated human sacrifice on an industrial scale, conducted in the open air with the participation and approval of virtually the entire population. The woman tending the rooftop garden brings you a cup of water at some point, her expression sympathetic, and you realise tears are streaming down your face, that you're shaking, that you've been standing rigid for hours while your body processes trauma your consciousness can't fully acknowledge. She says something gentle in Nahuatl, touches your shoulder, and returns to her plants. giving you space to fall apart quietly while the drums continue and the fires burn and the night swallows everything except the certainty that you could never, ever survive in this world. Morning finds you hunched beside a canal, your body rebelling in ways that would be humiliating if you had energy left for shame. The water you drank yesterday, drawn from what looked like a clean source but clearly wasn't, has colonized your intestines with microscopic invaders that your immune system has no memory of fighting. No antibodies prepared to counter. No defense against parasites that have co-evolved with the local population for thousands of years. The cramps double you over every few minutes, and the liquid pouring out of you carries away not just the meagre food you've managed to consume, but also precious salts and fluids your body desperately needs to maintain basic function. You're dehydrating rapidly in a city built on water, surrounded by canals and aqueducts, dying of thirst while literally sitting beside a lake. The Aztecs have sophisticated hygiene practices by the standards of their era, public latrines positioned over the canals at regular intervals, the waste collected for fertilizer rather than simply dumped, steam baths called temazcali used for purification and healing, a general cleanliness that Spanish conquistadors will note with surprise when they eventually arrive. But sophisticated doesn't mean safe for someone without local immunities, without the gut flora that develops from childhood exposure to local pathogens, without the resistance that comes from generational adaptation. You're a blank slate, immunologically speaking, and everything in this environment is taking advantage. A woman notices your distress and approaches with a clay cup filled with something murky. She speaks in Nahuatl, gesturing at your stomach, at the canal, at your obviously foreign appearance, and you understand she's offering medicine or at least trying to help. You drink what she gives you because you're desperate, and the liquid tastes like dirt mixed with bitter herbs, coating your mouth with residue that makes you want to spit it out immediately. But you force it down, and she nods approval, says something else that might be instructions or warnings, and moves on to her own business, leaving you to wonder whether you've just consumed actual medicine or simply placebo mixed with potentially more parasites. The diarrhea isn't your only problem. Your skin itches constantly, raising welts that you scratch until they bleed, and you realise you're being eaten alive by insects you can't see: fleas, lice, possibly mites, the microscopic livestock that every human in this era carries as standard equipment. The Aztecs deal with this through regular bathing and the temazcali steam baths, but you haven't had access to proper washing facilities, have been sleeping rough, have accumulated a colony of parasites that view your body as prime real estate. The itching drives you nearly mad, worse than the stomach cramps because at least those come in waves. While the itching is constant, a background radiation of discomfort that never stops. Your feet are in terrible shape, blistered and swollen from walking on stone surfaces in footwear never designed for this terrain. The Aztecs wear sandals made from maguey fibre or animal hide, the soles tough and thick, the straps positioned to support the foot during hours of walking on unforgiving surfaces. You're wearing whatever shoes you arrived in, and they're falling apart, the cushioning compressed into uselessness, the materials separating at the seams, providing no protection against the jagged stone of the causeways and streets. Every step sends pain shooting up your legs, and you've developed a limp that marks you even more clearly as weak, as prey, as someone barely surviving. The lack of proper nutrition is catching up too. You haven't consumed enough protein in days, subsisting mainly on corn and beans that provide calories but not the complete amino acid profiles your body needs. The Aztecs supplement their diet with insects, small game, fish from the lake, occasional turkey, but these protein sources require either money you don't have or knowledge of where to find them wild. You're slowly starving despite being surrounded by food, your body beginning to cannibalize its own muscle tissue for the nutrients it can't extract from the limited diet available to you. Do you remember the worst flu you ever had? how everything hurt, how even breathing seemed like too much effort. You're living in that state continuously now, your body under siege from multiple directions simultaneously, fighting battles on fronts you can't even identify. The cumulative effect is a fog of misery that makes thinking difficult, that reduces your world to immediate physical sensations, pain, nausea, exhaustion, thirst, hunger, itching, all layered on top of each other until they blend into a single experience of suffering. Historians still argue whether pre-Columbian Americans were healthier than their European contemporaries, whether the lack of large domesticated animals protected them from zoonotic diseases or left them more vulnerable when those diseases eventually arrived. From your position beside this canal, watching your body fail in dozens of small ways, you think maybe everyone in the 16th century was sick most of the time, that baseline health was what you'd call chronic illness, that the absence of modern medicine meant everyone simply endured levels of discomfort you can't imagine tolerating long term. The steam baths you've heard about remain inaccessible because you don't know where they are, don't know the protocols for using them, can't pay whatever fees they require. You watch people emerge from buildings near the canal, their skin pink and glowing, their bodies relaxed, and understand they've just experienced the Temazcali, the purification ritual that combines heat, herbs, and ritual to promote healing. The baths are part medical treatment, part religious ceremony, supervised by specialists who know exactly which plants to burn, which prayers to recite, which body parts to massage or scrape clean. You're excluded from the knowledge, from this care, from this basic maintenance that keeps the local population functional. The water situation becomes critical by midday. You're desperately thirsty, your mouth dry as sand, your tongue swollen, but drinking from the canals again will only accelerate the parasitic invasion destroying your intestines. You need the fresh water from the aqueducts, the springs from Chapultepec that feed public fountains throughout the city. But finding these sources requires local knowledge you lack. You wander through streets asking people for water in your own language, then in desperate pantomime, and most ignore you while a few point vaguely in directions that lead nowhere useful. A priest eventually takes pity, his matted hair and blood-stained robes somehow reassuring in their familiarity. You've seen enough priests by now to recognize the archetype. He leads you to a public fountain where clear water flows from a carved stone spout, gestures that you should drink, and waits while you consume more water than you thought possible, your body absorbing it like desert sand absorbing rain. The priest says something about the god's generosity. You gather from his gestures toward the temple district, and you nod grateful agreement even though your gratitude is directed at hydraulic engineering rather than divine intervention. But the fresh water provides only temporary relief. Your body is already compromised, already hosting infections and parasites that clean water won't eliminate, already depleted of nutrients that water alone can't replace. You need medicine, actual medicine, the kind that won't exist for centuries, antibiotics for the bacterial infections, antiparasitics for the worms probably colonizing your intestines, vitamins to address the deficiencies accumulating in your cells, electrolyte solutions to rebalance your chemistry, pain relievers to make existence bearable. Instead, you have herbs and prayers and hope. The same tools everyone in this era relies on. The same resources that keep average life expectancy somewhere in the 30s, that make childbirth a common cause of death, that mean a simple infected cut can kill you through sepsis, that turn every illness into a potential death sentence. You're experiencing firsthand what historians describe in abstracts the brutal reality of pre-modern medicine, where suffering is endemic and survival often depends more on luck than treatment. You find a quiet corner near a temple wall and collapse, your body demanding rest it won't get, your mind spinning through scenarios of escape that all founder on the same problems you can't speak the language. can't navigate the city, can't access resources, can't survive the journey even if you somehow made it to the mainland, can't do anything except endure and hope your body's natural resilience somehow carries you through despite all evidence suggesting it won't. The realization crystallizes with absolute clarity as you watch dawn break over the causeways for what might be the last time there is no escape from Tenochtitlan. The three main causeways that connect the island city to the mainland are guarded day and night by warriors who check every person leaving, looking for escaped slaves, criminals fleeing justice, tribute collectors absconding with goods, or anyone else whose departure might offend the cosmic order. You watch the morning shift change at the southern causeway checkpoint, fresh guards arriving to replace those who've stood watch through the night, and their vigilance is professional, thorough, suspicious of everyone. They stop a merchant, inspect his goods, question him at length before allowing passage. They turn back a family entirely, sending them retreating into the city with gestures that suggest their paperwork, whatever form that takes here, isn't in order. You have no paperwork, no authorization, no plausible explanation for why you should be allowed to leave. Your foreign appearance would trigger immediate questioning. Your inability to communicate would be interpreted as deception or guilt. And even if by some miracle you talked your way past the guards, what then? The causeways are long exposed, with nowhere to hide if someone decides you're suspicious and sends runners after you. You'd be recaptured before you made it halfway to shore, brought back in bonds, and your fate would be sealed slavery at best, sacrifice at worst, because running suggests you have something to hide, and people with secrets are dangerous to the social order. But perhaps you could swim, could slip into the lake at night and paddle your way to freedom under cover of darkness. The thought dies as quickly as it forms, killed by cold practicality. Lake Texcoco is vast miles across in every direction, and while it's shallow in places, those shallows are thick with mud that would trap you, drag you under, or at minimum slow you to the point where any patrol boat could intercept you easily. The water is cold enough at night to induce hypothermia within an hour, and you're already weakened by disease and malnutrition, your body operating at a fraction of its normal capacity. You drown within sight of the city, your body washing up on the Chinampas to be found by farmers who'd report it to the authorities, who'd catalogue you as another foolish outsider who didn't understand the reality of the Empire's reach. Even if you somehow made it to shore, emerged shivering and half dead on the mainland's muddy banks, then what? The territory surrounding the lake for days in every direction is controlled by the Aztec Triple Alliance or its tribute states, towns and cities whose loyalty is bought through a combination of military intimidation and economic integration. They watch for refugees, report suspicious strangers, cooperate with imperial authorities because the alternative is worse. You'd be a foreign-faced, Nahuatl-ignorant wanderer in a landscape where everyone knows their neighbours, where strangers are immediately notable, where the assumptions would be that you're either an escaped slave or an enemy spy, neither of which ends well. Perhaps you could seek refuge with the Tlaxcalans, the independent state that resists Aztec dominance, that fights the flower wars rather than submit, but Tlaxcala is weeks of travel away across difficult terrain, through regions where your inability to speak the language or navigate the social protocols would get you killed or captured long before you reached any potential sanctuary. And even if you made it, why would the Tlaxcalans help you? You're not one of them, can't contribute to their society, can't fight in their wars, would be just another mouth to feed, another foreign element in a culture that's already struggling for survival against the Empire's pressure. They'd be as likely to sacrifice you to their own gods as offer protection, because the divine exchange isn't uniquely Aztec, it's Mesoamerican, shared across cultures with only minor variations in practice. The northern routes offer no better prospects. The deserts beyond the northern territories are vast and unforgiving, home to nomadic groups who view settled peoples, whether Aztec or otherwise, with hostility, earned through generations of conflict. You die of thirst or exposure or arrows shot from distances you'd never see the archer. Your bones becoming one more anonymous skeleton in the dust that testifies to the barrier those deserts represent, the eastern route toward the coast. Through mountains and jungles inhabited by recently conquered peoples who might see a foreign stranger as opportunity a slave to sell back to the Aztecs, a sacrifice to offer their own gods, a messenger from enemies whose arrival could trigger rebellion, or they might simply kill you for your possessions, meagre as they are. Because in a world without police or central authority beyond what the Empire can project, violence is always an option, always available, always rational if you can get away with it. Do you remember feeling trapped in a bad job or relationship? That sense of having no good options, only choices between different forms of suffering. This is that feeling magnified 1,000-fold. Compressed into physical reality, where every possible escape route leads to death or recapture, where the walls of your prison are measured in miles of water and days of hostile territory, and the fundamental impossibility of surviving as an outsider in a world that has no space for people without identity, without affiliation, without the elaborate networks of clan and kalpuli and tribute obligation that give everyone else their place in the social order. The lake itself is part of the defensive genius that makes Tenochtitlan so powerful. The Aztecs chose this island location precisely because it's defendable, controllable, a city that can regulate who enters and exits with choke point efficiency. The causeways can be broken, turning the island into a fortress accessible only by canoe, and even the canoe traffic is monitored, taxed, inspected by officials whose entire job is knowing who's moving what where. You've watched these officials at work in the canals, stopping boats at random, checking cargo, asking questions, writing notes in codices with glyphs you can't read, but that clearly serve bureaucratic purposes. The Empire tracks everything: goods, people, obligations, payments, debts with administrative precision that wouldn't be out of place in modern governments. Your face is now known. You realize with creeping dread, the guards have seen you, the merchants remember you. The vendors who you've attempted to buy from have marked you as strange, as foreign, as someone who doesn't fit. The city has eyes, thousands of them, and memory that preserves anomalies like you because anomalies are dangerous, are potentially disruptive, are worth reporting to authorities who reward information. Even if you tried to hide, to become invisible in the crowds, your appearance betrays you the wrong skin tone, wrong build, wrong way of moving through space that identifies you as emphatically not from here. The sun climbs higher, and you watch the city wake fully, watch the daily rhythms resume, watch people move through their lives with the confidence of belonging, of understanding, of having a place in this world that you will never possess. A mother walks past with children, speaking to them in Nahuatl that flows like water, teaching them something about the gods or history or proper behaviour. A merchant opens his stall, arranging goods with practiced efficiency, calling out to potential customers in phrases honed through years of repetition. Warriors jog past in formation, their bodies synchronized, their purpose clear, heading toward training or patrol or whatever duties their status demands. You're not part of this, can never be part of this. Even if you somehow survived long enough to learn the language and customs and protocols, your face would always mark you as foreign. Your lack of childhood socialization would always leave gaps in your knowledge. Your absence from the elaborate kinship networks would always make you suspect. The Aztec world is tightly woven, every thread connected to every other, and there's no space for loose ends, no room for people who can't demonstrate their place in the tapestry. Historians still argue whether Tenochtitlan was a cosmopolitan city that welcomed foreigners or an insular culture that viewed outsiders with suspicion. But from your position of desperate exclusion, you think maybe both perspectives are correct. The city welcomes foreigners who arrive with proper credentials, with ambassadorial status, with goods to trade and tribute to offer and cultural literacy to smooth interactions. What it doesn't welcome is someone like you, nobody, from nowhere, with nothing to contribute, no explanation for existence, no place in any framework that makes sense to the people who built this civilization. The truth settles over you like a shroud you wouldn't last a day in the Aztec Empire. Not really. Not beyond the initial curiosity and confusion that's kept you alive so far through the combination of luck and the mercy of strangers who've taken pity on your obvious helplessness. That grace period is ending. Your body is failing. Your options are narrowing to points of light that grow dimmer with each passing hour. You're dying slowly in one of the greatest cities human civilization has produced, surrounded by abundance you can't access, knowledge you can't learn, systems you can't navigate, and the irony is almost funny if it weren't so terrifying. The drums begin again from the temple district, marking midday, calling people to observances you can't participate in, reminding you that even time itself is structured according to logics that exclude you. Your last thought before exhaustion claims you is that perhaps the Spanish conquistadors who'll eventually arrive will feel this same alienation, this same inability to survive in a world so profoundly different from their own, except they'll have weapons and horses and diseases that tip the balance, that transform their vulnerability into the Empire's doom. But you have none of those advantages. You have only this moment, this morning, this final understanding that some worlds are so foreign that bridging them requires more than courage or intelligence or willpower. Sometimes the gap is simply too wide, and trying to cross it only guarantees you fall. Underscore 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 underscore. The drums fade into something softer now, or perhaps your perception is shifting. The edges of experience becoming gentle as your body finally surrenders to exhaustion, too profound to fight any longer. The sun on your face feels warm, almost kind, and somewhere nearby water laps against stone in rhythms older than empire, older than cities, older than the gods whose names you never learn to pronounce correctly. You think about home, wherever and whenever that is, and whether anyone there misses you or even knows you're gone. You think about the merchant who gave you water, the woman who offered medicine, the priest who showed you the fountain. Small kindnesses in a world that had no obligation to offer any. You think about the warriors parading their captives, the athletes in the ball court, the vendors in the marketplace, all of them living with such intensity, such purpose, such absolute certainty about their place in the cosmic order. Perhaps you were never meant to last here. Perhaps some journeys are about witnessing rather than surviving, about understanding through experience that human worlds can be so different from each other that they might as well be different planets. And that's okay. The Aztecs built something magnificent by their own measures, something that worked for them, something that will be remembered long after the stones of Tenochtitlan are scattered and buried beneath a different city with a different name. Your breathing slows. The sounds of the city grow distant, muffled, as if you're sinking underwater while the world above continues without you. Somewhere a child laughs, somewhere a dog barks, somewhere the Great Pyramid stands against the sky, and at its summit the eternal fires burn, and the gods receive their offerings, and the sun prepares for another journey through the darkness, and everything continues as it always has, as it always will. until it doesn't. Sleep takes you gently, finally, offering the mercy that the waking world withheld, and your last sensation is gratitude for what? You're not entirely sure, but it feels important to be grateful anyway, to let that be your final contribution to this place that never quite made space for you, never quite understood what you were or why you came, but tolerated your presence nonetheless until nature and circumstance decided otherwise. The empire goes on, the drums go on, the people go on, and you, finally, let go.